Welcome to The Great Exchange, a podcast about examining the lies that we believe and exchanging them for God's truth. I'm your host, Brady Cohn, and joining me this morning is our co-host, Jason Wilson.
Morning, Brady.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to see you here.
So I have my coffee in front of me.
Good to see here, I said.
See here, yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's what happens when you don't have any coffee in front of you. I have my coffee, which means my brain is starting to function.
Well, you know that I have a little sensitivity to coffee. I have a cutoff of like 9 o'clock. If I feel
you're a
real
very
crazy,
sensitive man.
9:30 a.m. is my cutoff for coffee.
Interesting.
Or I will not sleep for a long time. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good.
See, I drink coffee all day long, but caffeine really does nothing to me. It doesn't help me. It's just it's more of a psychological.
It's what most addicts would say.
Mechanism. I could quit anytime.
I could quit at any time. I just enjoy
choose
it.
Not to.
I enjoy it.
So yes,
I don't have an addiction. Addiction has me.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So I have my coffee, so my brain is fully functioning, which is good because we have some good stuff to talk about today.
Do you think this is maybe one of the most awkward intros we've had so far?
Probably,
in our co-hosting.
But I'm like really the king of awkward moments. I create awkward moments all the time. So I feel like I can be so socially awkward sometimes and just don't know quite how to interact with people.
I would agree. My wife hates awkward silence and cannot stand it, and I just embrace it sometimes.
Oh yeah.
See, how long could we just sit here?
Yes, I could see you doing that.
Who's going to break first?
My awkwardness comes in. I don't know how to interject into conversation. So I'm great at one-on-one conversations, but you add a third or more people, and I don't know how to interact. And so there's this conversation happening, and I start to say something, and it's as if I don't exist. Like I'm like interrupted and the conversation continues and I just stop mid-sentence and it's as if I do not exist.
I've experienced that.
Yeah. And so then I don't know how to move on from there. And
not like I've experienced you do that. I've done that. And so, I have a kind of a motto I live by that I try not to play games I can't win. And if I feel like I'm going to interject into a crowd of people talking and it's going to just, if I don't feel pretty confident, I'm just going to sit and listen. Yeah. Because I would rather just be not seen than be seen looking like a jackass.
And feel like you're rejected.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely. So anyway, well, that's good to know about you. We've all experienced those awkward moments and have to work through society. Why do we have to live in a society?
I don't know. Just move to a rural farm.
Yes, well.
In Seattle.
Yes, well, I do have a rural farm, but maybe in a place other than Seattle would probably help.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, today we are going to talk about some deep things. And it's actually a little bit of a follow-up to a previous conversation we had a few weeks ago or a couple months ago. We did an episode on transgenderism, and we talked about Leah Thomas, the swimmer who is transgender. And you asked me a question a couple times that I felt like I didn't have a great answer for. The question you asked me was, what is it that they're actually celebrating? Because some people in our culture are so adamant that should be celebrated, accepted. What are they, like, what is the heart behind that? Why are they so adamant? It's not just like we should tolerate this, everyone do their own thing, but like we have to celebrate. They're so adamant that we do that. So what is it that's being celebrated? So I've really been reflecting, praying on that the last few weeks. And I just keep going back to Romans 1, and it's such a great description of how we get caught into sin. And so, the Great Exchange, it's named after Romans 1. They exchange the truth about God for a lie and worship creation instead of the creator. And so I'm going to go back and just read a section of Romans 1 here, and then we're going to dig into what is the lie that our culture is believing? What are they actually worshiping? What truths are they exchanging for lies? So starting in Romans chapter 1, verse 21 says, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, so their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged natural function that for which is unnatural, and in the same way also the men abandoned natural function of the women and burned in their desire toward one another, men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. And just as they did not see fit to honor God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wicked, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but they also give hearty approval to those who practice them. There's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
And that's a whole list of sins. That's why, we always go to these passages to talk about homosexuality, Romans 1. But this covers so many areas of sin. But what I really want to focus on is giving the hearty approval to those who practice, because that's where our culture is at. We not only tolerate these things, we give such hearty approval to them, and people get so offended if you were to dare disagree with what some of these people are doing and look at biology and say it's wrong. And so what is the heart? And I think I've come to the conclusion is the idol being served here is freedom, is personal autonomy.
Correct.
And so it is the idol of self-worship. It's the idol of I can do whatever I want without constraint. That's what people call freedom.
Yeah, and let me mention that too. I feel like part of that is the first part of that. I do think, talking about being people being who they are and celebrating freedom. I think the first half of that is good.
Yeah,
it is the. You're talking about the discipline aspect on the back end, I think is where it gets strange, or it starts to get sinful. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but I do feel like if we go back to the original question, what are people celebrating? And I feel like the swimmer, that was, I feel so long ago now that it happened in the news cycle.
Yeah.
But the people I know that were like celebrating that, they weren't celebrating, here's a biological male crushing women in a sport. Like that wasn't their
absolutely.
motive. They weren't malicious about.
They were celebrating that this is a transgender person who's doing this.
Right, and there was a tone of like bravery and sort of beating back barriers and opening doors for all kinds of people, making it more inclusive. And I would say on the surface, great, right? But we see the implications. It's not playing out right. But Absolutely. The initial celebration is of those things.
And that's why they can kind of back us into a corner sometimes, it feels like, with those conversations, because it's like, oh, well, don't you want to be inclusive of people, give all people opportunity? And so that's where on the surface, it looks like some good virtue at times. And they can use what looks like good virtue to kind of back us into a corner to celebrate things that I don't feel like should be celebrated.
And I don't know if this analogy is harsh or not. So if it is, I apologize. I'm not trying to make it harsh. But I believe it was in The Reason for God by Tim Keller, talking about the constraints of Christianity, right? That would be an objection that Christianity is like a straitjacket and doesn't allow you freedom. But his illustration was, it's like playing scales or learning a musical instrument where you work on the scales. There's a constraint there that allows a musician to then do a solo in a song later, and it sounds beautiful. But without the discipline and the constraint of the scale, then it just sounds like a toddler banging on keys, right?
Absolutely.
The constraints or the restrictions, or maybe a better way to say it, the boundaries given to us in Christianity with our sexuality or with our words, think about that list you just had of gossip, or disobeying parents, right? There's constraints that are given to us that allow us that when we do express ourselves later, it's actually more beautiful because of the restraint, not because the restraint is lacking.
Absolutely. And so the constraints God gives us helps us to flourish and be more fully human, whereas our culture says that our humanity comes from expressing the feelings that are inside of us. And many times those feelings are based on lies. They're based on dysfunction. And so, but our society says that freedom is being able to express whatever is inside of us.
Correct.
Whereas Christianity turns that on its head. And whereas freedom comes from Christ, we've been set free from ourselves so we don't have to express what is going on inside of us, because what's going on inside of us is not healthy. It's dysfunction. It's sinful. It's based on lies, and we can exchange those for his truth.
Right. And even going back to a Christian view of individualism versus, say, an Eastern view, it's not that we're trying to actually remove any sort of distinctions, but in Christ we become more of who we actually are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's why we see Christianity, whenever it is in, like, say, Southeast Asia, it has a different feel, a flavor, almost a sound, a tone, like a church on a Sunday morning. It's going to sound very different than a Latin American church, right? Because it's not trying to remove distinction, but it's actually making those people more expressive of who they are.
Yeah,
which is
good.
Right. Well, that's the celebration with a transgender athlete. Like, that's celebrating that part. They're being more who they are. I'm putting that in air quotes, right? That's the good part.
Because you don't actually believe that's who they are, but that's who they think that they are.
Right. So it's a weird, the celebration is being who we really are. And we would say as Christians, who we really are comes out more in our restrictions that lead us to more freedom. That's the irony of it all.
Absolutely. And so there's irony. There's like, by being a slave to Christ, that's how you have freedom.
Correct.
By enslaving yourself to our Savior. And that's what Paul says. He's a slave to Christ, but it's through that he has freedom.
Right. And the opposite is true, is if we are a slave to our desires, then it actually leads to less freedom, not more.
Absolutely.
I just preached at you, Brady.
Yeah, very good. I love that. I've really been evaluating, how did our culture get here? How does our culture here in the U.S. Play into this? And I've made some interesting connections that I don't know if everyone will agree with, but I feel like as a culture, we idolize freedom. And sometimes we worship freedom. And idols are something that are good things that God gave us, that we make the ultimate thing, that we place our hope in. And in the U.S., we romanticize and idealize this concept of freedom. And so, I grew up watching Westerns, and it's like, these cowboys are the macho, they have freedom, and but they use that freedom for good, for, they're always saving the day, rescuing someone. But then you look back at, American history, and I love America, I love our history, but we're founded on the principles of freedom. The colonials, it's like we rebelled against
high tax
the king because of high taxes, which sometimes I wrestle with. It's like, was that a noble purpose to shed life over? Like, so I know that sounds so un-American of me, but it's like, I don't know if that was if the American Revolution was a just war. And people say, well, but we weren't represented. It's like, but does that make a just war to take lives over? Like, I wrestle with that a lot.
Well, very American, though, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
It's part of the American motto is to pursue happiness.
Yes. And do that with freedom.
Yeah.
And so I think where I would probably, make some people angry here is that it's the ideological left that is promoting all of the transgender, the sexual and gender ideology of I can be whoever I want to be, but that's actually steeped in all of American culture, even in the political and ideological right. This idolatry of freedom, that's what our hope is in. That's where we find our value, and we're going to fight to the death for it.
Right.
And so most political conservatives would not appreciate me saying that they can also idolize freedom in unhealthy ways, and that's the same root that we're seeing this crazy gender expression in our culture, but it really is coming down to being our own God and thinking that I can find freedom in myself apart from Christ. And sometimes we think that we can find freedom from politics, freedom, that's where we're gonna where we find our freedom, and that's not true. Our freedom comes from Christ when we submit to Him. Mm-hmm. And so I think that all of this is wrapped up in an Americanized, sometimes idolatry of freedom. And don't get me wrong, I like political freedom. I like a lot of things about America and our ideals, but all good things can become idols.
Sure.
And when we're willing to fight to the death for something and sacrifice, that's this revealing of what we're actually worshiping.
And I would just say, even to the Christians listening, thinking about, oh yeah, people just want to celebrate their freedom. But I've seen, just even pastorally, there's a lot of Christians who have no constraints, no restrictions on their life. I do. Let me explain it this way. I do feel like following Jesus, it is a weird tension between I'm carrying a cross, but also I found life more abundantly. Right? There's a tension there, and I do feel like if there is no rhythms or patterns in our life where we say, all right, as a Christian, I don't do this, and I do this, and I don't necessarily want to, but to live under that restraint, I have to. Like a little one would be just, showing up on a Sunday morning to church when you don't feel like it is a huge mark of discipleship, to say, I'm going to be with God's people today, even though I'd rather stay home. Like, it's just little stuff like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be huge, like I'm going to sell everything and move to a foreign country and be a missionary there. But there should be some aspects.
Discipline and self-sacrifice.
Yes, because it's a fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. Faithfulness is a fruit of the Spirit. I mean, I'm going to be faithful to God's people, and like my presence there. So that's a pastoral way.
That reminds me, one time I was complaining to Mary about all these things I'm lacking, like self-control and discipline and, gentleness at times. And I was like, I just don't think that those are possible for me. She was like, well, those are fruits of the Spirit. So I think they should be possible.
Right.
So, because Christ changes us.
Yes.
But I see that thread throughout our culture of idolizing freedom that comes out in our politics, in our just ideology of all these things. And I think that so many of our issues come back to this root cause of idolizing freedom so that we have bodily autonomy. And that's gender ideology, that's sexuality of I can do whatever I want, and any constraint on my body is harmful for me. Is
mask mandates.
Yeah, there you go. Mask mandates. Let's really step in it today. Might as well go all out there. But I see that same root at the heart of abortion right now. That's big in our culture right now because Roe versus Wade and all that's going on. Is that I wonder, like, how are people so extremely, extremely passionate about this? Like it's like they are living and dying over this issue. They, are willing to, it seems like, fight to the death over this issue. Why are they willing to give their life for that? Why are they so passionate about defending this practice of abortion? And it comes down to bodily autonomy of I can do whatever I want, and any constraint to my body, because I am my own God. And at the heart of that is I am my own God, and I'm going to worship myself.
Right.
And for me to be able to worship myself, I can't have any constraints set on my body by anything or anyone.
Right. Well, sorry, not to step in it again, but I remember a buddy of mine was working at a grocery store during, the kind of the height of COVID. And and he's like 5'6", right? He's not a big guy. And this guy who was like 6'4", was like threatening to beat him up because he said, "Sir, you're supposed to wear a mask," and the guy was like, "It's my body, you ain't gonna tell," And I'm like, so it's where you see kind of both sides of that. Like, it's people ready to fight over that.
Absolutely, it's like pro-abortion people have always said, "My body, my choice," which obviously, as our Christians, we argue that that's another body inside of them.
Correct. It is a little different,
and so that's different. But then the whole mask thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what happened to my body, my choice, and the vaccine mandates and
correct,
all that. So it's just there's so many political talking points and just
we see, I think the point is we see a desire on both the right and the left for freedom and autonomy to do what they want to do.
It just comes in different ways, and so there's still idolatry of freedom and autonomy, and so one looks patriotic and one doesn't.
Sure,
but it can still be the same roots of idolatry of no constraints on my life.
Right. I don't want any constraints at all.
Absolutely.
No, and I get that.
And we worship that.
Yeah.
And we worship that on the political and ideological and religious left, and we worship that on the political and ideological and religious right of this. And I think we don't always realize how our Americanism and sometimes patriotism has gotten mixed up with our Christianity, and we consider them to the same. Yes, we will be doing a podcast in the future on that, and there's a lot to talk about. And it's an election season, so there's a lot to talk about there.
Oh man!
And so
it's gonna be
probably
fun.
Most of us just want it to be over.
I agree.
We'll talk about it and hopefully examine our hearts and figure out where are we idolizing certain political beliefs and people. And
that'll be fun.
I think that in these trying, difficult times, our hearts are revealed. So whenever we go through an election and how we see people respond to politics and all these issues reveals what we actually value. And it's easy to throw a Christian label on those values when that's not always the case.
So what do you think the cure is then for, well, maybe it's not the cure is the wrong thing. We talked about what did we celebrate culturally? Leah Thompson, was that
Yeah.
her?
Yeah.
Right. So Leah Thompson.
What we're celebrating is this
freedom,
this idolatry of self, of that my humanity is found in expressing whatever is going on inside of me.
How would you express that as a non-Christian? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I believe so.
So if let's say
biology.
Well,
I mean, that's because of this worship of self and this worship of freedom, they're ignoring basic biology. And so I believe a non-Christian should believe in basic biology and should be able to look at biology and say that this isn't right, that there is something off that is causing people to ignore science.
Well, I'll put it this way. I would say the celebration would be, to get a quick answer, would be that someone would say they would celebrate Leah Thompson because she stepped out bravely to be who she is. Right. And I think that would, bottom line, that would be the celebration.
Absolutely. That is the celebration.
That's the celebration.
The freedom to be who she feels like she is.
Well, and even the bravery aspect of it too, to say that wouldn't be an easy decision, right? To do that. And so I think that would be it. But the counter response would be, right, that it's not. That's not the identity. That's not the brave. The freedom's not there.
We don't believe that is who she is. We believe she's living in slavery to, as a Christian, I believe she's living in slavery to lies as she has believed. And I want her to find freedom from that.
Right.
And so, Galatians 5 talks about freedom, and Galatians 5:1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. And when I look at Leah Thompson's life, I see a life that is burdened by a yoke of slavery. And so we as Christians, it's hard to balance these things out of wanting the systems in our country that we're sometimes responsible for to honor God, and also respect the dignity and value of people. And so when people look at Leah Thompson, I pray that they can have compassion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can talk and we can discuss, and we should figure out, should this be allowed? And I don't think it should be allowed, but we shouldn't do that at the expense of compassion and grace and making disciples and understanding that there's something spiritual going on here, not just political.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that was helpful.
Oh, well, good.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Jason. Always a pleasure to have you on here and hear some of your deep thoughts and wisdom.
Appreciate that, Brady.
Yes. Thank you once again for joining us for the Great Exchange podcast. We pray that as you go throughout your week, you can examine some of these lies that you may have believed and exchange them for God's truth. And it'll change your heart. It'll change the way you're living. It'll change the way you love other people. And you can experience true freedom that can only come from Christ. Have a great week.